This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by Hangman Fine Art Services. As an art advisor, my role goes beyond helping clients acquire artworks for their collections. It's also about ensuring those artworks make it safely from the gallery to their homes. Art shipping can be a nerve-wracking process. Things can go wrong, and it's crucial to prevent these issues from occurring. Also, over the years, I found that shipping quotes can vary significantly. One shipper might quote thousands more than another for the exact same service. A few years ago, I discovered Hangman. Whenever I requested shipping quotes from various fine art shippers, Hangman almost always provided the most competitive prices. But it's not just about the cost. Hangman offers reliable, professional service and maintains excellent communication throughout the process. They guide me on how to pack specific works and keep me updated on the shipment status until it's safely delivered to my clients. Now, Hangman is my go-to art shipper. Their combination of affordability, reliability, and excellent customer service is unmatched. If you're not already a regular customer, I genuinely recommend giving them a try. I'm thrilled to have Hangman as a sponsor of the ArtTactic Podcast. To learn more about Hangman, visit www.hangmannyc.com. And you can also find them on Instagram at HangmanFineArts. Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. As the art market continues to navigate shifting dynamics, the standing of the June London auctions within the overall auction calendar has become increasingly uncertain. Once a cornerstone of the art market, these auctions have seen a significant decline in sales volume over the past few years, with Christie's even opting out of hosting an evening sale this June. For example, in June of 2014, 10 years ago, these auctions produced over £347 million. This year, under $100 million. In this week's episode, I'm joined by George Nelson, the UK reporter for ARTnews, who recently wrote several insightful articles covering the recent June post-war and contemporary auctions in London. We discussed the mood in London heading into the auction season, comparing this year's performance to previous years, and the different strategies employed by Sotheby's and Christie's. George also shares some highlights and surprise results from the season, and we explore emerging trends and the prevailing sentiment as we approach the traditional summer break in the art world. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. George, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. So in some of our recent auction and fair recap episodes, we've started by discussing the overall sentiment heading into these events. I think it sets a crucial context, just given the changing dynamics of the art market. So with that in mind, can you share your insights on what the mood was like among collectors and dealers in London as we approach this June auction season?
Yeah, I'd say the mood was pretty similar to how it was heading into June last year in London. There's been some anxiety of late with the ongoing market correction narrative and all of the events rumbling on in the background, like wars in Ukraine and Gaza. We have, high inflation in the UK, and the uncertainty that an impending election brings, among other things. Thankfully the election is now over, but the world is in turmoil. So the build up to the summer season, there was definitely some apprehension. People were hoping the results would be better than last year, which was pretty bad. And nerves are running a little high because, as you know, bidding has been shallower, estimates lower, and generally expectations were definitely muted before the sales. I think very few people were getting overexcited because, firstly, London's spring sales didn't serve up many reasons to rejoice about the health of the art market. And also, I think, from my viewpoint at least, I think the actual auctions themselves and the artworks were a little less exciting coming into June. So if you look at this time last year, Phillips' modern and contemporary evening sale, it didn't even make its low estimates. I think Sotheby's sale raked in about 40% less than it did the year before. And I think Christie's two sales only just edged past their low estimate. So, people weren't getting too overexcited. And then, the narrative follows on from what happened in November in New York. It was a pretty similar story. And this year, at the end of the auctions in June, the results were tepid, and so was the mood leading into it. And I'm sure we'll get on to this in a minute, but with Christie's cancelling its June evening sale and Sotheby sticking, the summer season felt a little bit experimental. Both houses are rolling the dice to an extent, which is great to see, from a neutral standpoint, because we get to see which strategy is the most effective at the end of the day. And then, so the mood going into June, reflected the state of the art market, which is fairly cool at the moment, but perhaps not to the extent that some people like to believe. A few of the London galleries I spoke to before the summer auctions, they remain pretty optimistic, and said in one way or another that there's a lot of fear-mongering going on, mostly sparked by the recent auction results, but also the political and economic situation I touched on before. These gallerists, they're choosing to adopt a kind of keep calm and carry on attitude, while talking about more measured, selective buyers, which is rhetoric for collectors kind of tightening their belts. And Christie's also told me this. In my article covering Sotheby's June auction, I touched on the fact that leading up to the sale, the election, the economy was struggling. You have Gaza and Ukraine. The pandemic wasn't so long ago. All of this is impacting people's mood and spending to some degree, and that's been reflected in the bidding over the last few auctions. And also, I think it's becoming harder for auction houses to consign top grade works at the moment, especially in London. People may be short on reasons to buy, but people are equally short on reasons to sell. And if you have a top grade artwork you're wanting to sell, I think New York is where you'd want to sell it right now, ideally in November, for one reason or another. And I'm sure we'll get on to the narrative about London's kind of waning power status in a minute. But yeah, so all of this compounds the soft nature of the art market in London and all the anxiety that comes with it. But to go back to your question, I'd say the mood leading into the summer season was mostly apprehensive. I think the big three auction houses would have taken the results if you'd given them to them before the auctions, especially as there are no disasters. Christie's probably just about came out on top, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of various aspects of the art market, explaining why the mood is a bit uncertain at the moment. I think we can't really point to one specific major reason, like we could, for example, during the Great Recession in 2008. But I think today is a culmination of several smaller factors, such as the economy we just had and also have looming major elections. You, of course, have wars in Israel and Russia, and we have some specific art market-related reasons. And as a result, I don't think you have a lot of collectors who feel they need to sell, in particular in this moment of uncertainty. So that is also a contributing factor for why sales may be slowing at these kinds of auctions. And I also have to say that it feels like there are more auctions in a calendar year than ever before. I'm not sure if the data necessarily backs that up, but it feels like there's always at least one, if not more, auctions occurring at the major auction houses. You have the online-only sales, you have the live sales. I think it's hard to keep track of everything, especially for collectors where art is a passion of theirs, right? It's not their job to be going to the auction house websites every day or to be able to be monitoring exactly when all the sales are upcoming and what are in those sales. So I think sometimes things fall through the cracks, and perhaps that equates to lesser sales as well. So looking at the auction season in London, you touched on Sotheby's and Christie's taking different approaches to this auction season. I think that's really interesting. How exactly did their approaches differ? And ultimately, how did this season perform compared to perhaps the past few years?
Yeah, I think from afar, it's difficult. Well, so firstly, Christie's cancelled its summer June auction, evening auction, and which is, obviously dominated the news before the season. I think from afar, it's difficult to see this move as anything other than a sign of the summer season's kind of shrinking relevance, despite what the auction houses are saying, especially when you take into account the staff layoffs at both houses in the UK. June hosted the first marquee sales in London since the news broke of the redundancies. So that also added to the kind of uncertain atmosphere and mood. It's hard to ignore the fact that the June auctions are becoming increasingly eclipsed by the London sales in March and October, as well as New York's marquee spring auctions. But I think it's easy to kind of view, or too easy, I should say, to view Christie's cancelling its June evening auction as a kind of pressing the panic button. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I've seen a few journalists being kind of branded as lazy for drawing those conclusions. I don't think it's quite so simple. If you look at Christie's totals in 2021 and 2022 for its June evening sales, they were pretty strong. I think they both passed, well past the 100 million mark. And I think that in 2022, it was almost touching the 200 million mark. So there was no cause for alarm. And because 2023 was a bit of a disaster, I think it only just edged past kind of 60 million pounds, which was obviously a huge disappointment. I'm not sure if one poor year is enough for someone like Christie's to initiate a major strategic shift, like cancelling its June sale. There's a lot more going on than that. I've spoken to Christie's a bit. They've told me that scrapping the evening sale is about a kind of bigger picture strategy shift. Obviously the house is opening its own building in Hong Kong later this year in September. This will give it more flexibility for when it can hold its sales in Asia. And I think, from what I understand, it's going to be holding. So it's going to be holding 2 marquee sales from this point on every year in each of its main locations. So it will host auctions in Hong Kong in September and April. New York will remain as it's always been, May and November. Paris will be April and October, I think. And then last, but of course not least, is London, which, it basically ended up with 3 seasons because it had sales in March, in June for the summer season, and then it had a contemporary sale during Frieze Week in October. But because Frieze Week has developed beyond just being a contemporary event in the art market, largely thanks to Frieze Masters, the convening moments in London in October, it's more kind of encompassing than it was before. So, if you look at what happened last October in London, Christie's it had a sale of work from the Josephowitz collection, which the house described as like its own Frieze Masters because the range was so broad. So it was massively successful, and that gave Christie's another reason to scrap its June evening sale and focus on March and October. And the narrative coming up of the top brass from Christie's is that it's thinking about London in June, quote, differently. And it pointed to its recent Vivienne Westwood sale as an example, which was also in June. I think they're trying to appeal to new clients. And they're also looking to do something kind of uniquely British that has crossover appeal in June in London with more entry price points. So it looks like they're positioning London to draw in a different crowd and perhaps a slightly younger audience. And they're trying to diversify their auctions. And with the big 3 having put all their eggs in the kind of contemporary basket, they've kind of left themselves a bit vulnerable to fluctuations in the contemporary market. So I think Christie's cancelling its June evening auction is a bit about risk mitigation mainly, but there are kind of other more nuanced reasons. And And then, I spoke to Keith Gill after the June sales. He's the head of Impressionist and Modern Art at Christie's. And, the mood coming out of the house is that they're pretty pleased by how things are going, since they cancelled the sale. It remains to be seen if Sotheby's will follow suit. I don't think either house will admit that London's status in the art world is sliding. Keith Gill said that people have been trying to view London negatively since Brexit, and I suppose he means people from Europe mostly. But again, like the galleries I spoke to, he kind of pointed to some fear mongering going on. And if I guess you can look at it cynically as well. Christie is saying one thing in that London is still great and has this brilliant appeal, but then it's doing another in changing strategy and moving away from the UK. So there are definitely two sides to the story. And then you look at Sotheby's results of the June evening sale, and they weren't brilliant, but it still edged past 100 million. And all of the specialists and the heads of department I spoke to there, in the press room right after that sale, they're very, very resolute. They're very keen to plow ahead and maintain the June evening sale. And there's no reason to suggest they'll cancel it anytime soon. They're being very, very determined and tenacious. So they're showing resolve, and they scraped past 100 million, which is no mean feat in such a tough market. There is also reason to be optimistic. And then if we compare the results of this June to last June, I think the Ralph Goldenberg collection helped Sotheby's a lot and injected about 16 million into this year's total. There were some nice kind of Robert Ryman works, Cy Tomley. There are a couple of Fontanas. And this shows, I think, that, the top-notch works at the higher end of the market are still very much in demand. A Giacometti sold for 1.5 million. A pretty ugly Cy Tomley sculpture sold for 2 million. So, things aren't all that bad. And then if we look at Christie's, the post-war to present sale during the day, that totaled about $13 million, which was about, it's 3 million shy of its high estimate. So again, they were pretty chuffed about this. And several of the white-hot contemporary artists did very well, surpassing their estimates by quite a long way. And also, I think that the much younger artists outshone the older artists. I touched upon this in my article. People like Richter and Gaston, they didn't actually do very well. So I think that definitely kind of justified Christie's move to scrap its evening sale, definitely.
And I know you touched on some of the auction results already in your previous answer, but what were some of the highlights and surprise auction results of the season?
There weren't a huge number of surprises. A number of the ultra contemporary artists did pretty well at Christie's post-war to present sale, especially at the beginning of the auction. Many kind of tripled or quadrupled their estimates. And in one case, one kind of multiplied the high estimate by 10 times over. So there's definitely good news there. There are a few young artists kind of born in the late 80s, early 90s, like Daisy Paris, another one called Clementine Keith Roach, and Ben Sledson, among others. All of them did very well. And the one who surpassed their estimate by 10 times was a great young painter called Sophia Loeb. And she's not even 30 years old. So, there's definitely an appetite for white-hot artists at the moment. The market for flipped young kind of young arts has been pretty hot, especially at Sotheby's last year in New York in May. Interest cooled somewhat last year, but the signs this June definitely, added some encouragement. And then for the Sotheby's evening sale, the talk before that was kind of dominated by the Basquiat triptych, which was called Portrait of the Artist as a Young Derelict. That was listed at $20 to $25 million, which was $5 million shy of its $30 million estimate at Christie's last year before it was pulled. So that kind of overshadowed the sale somewhat. and it offered a kind of market prognosis. Luckily for Sotheby's, it did sell, just making its low estimate, which was probably what was expected. Also, Renoir sold pretty well. One of his works doubled its estimates, selling for about 7 million. But other than that, there were no huge surprises. The Goldenberg collection kind of propped up the sale to an extent, especially its Tomley pieces. But I don't think collections are generally a very accurate reflection of the market, just simply because of their uniqueness, right? So they only tend to come up once in a blue moon, and that rarity fuels bidding in the bubble. So if you compare the Goldenberg collection to other blockbuster estates that have been sold over the last few years, like those belonging to Macklow and Fisher Landau and Paul Allen and people like that, the Goldenberg definitely doesn't have the same rank. I'd say it's definitely kind of lower down the pecking order, which again is the reflection of things at the moment. And then, kind of Phillips across Mayfair during the same time, also pretty unspectacular. I think the headline lot there was a George Condo that sold for about 200,000 above its high estimate, as well as a kind of an Andy Warhol Campbell suit print. So pretty quiet, to be honest. And no huge records were broken.
And so looking at the week as a whole, are there any specific trends you think we can take away from this season?
I mean, whichever way you look at it, it's obvious that there's less confidence in London from a contemporary viewpoint, if that's a trend. Demonstrated in no uncertain terms by Christie's cancelling its evening sale. It'll be interesting to see how the trajectory of London's status changes over the next couple of years. It certainly feels like it's losing ground to New York and Asia. But we'll see which narrative holds water. Is it is London's kind of shifting control? Is it part of a well thought out strategic shift by Christie's, or is it a panic move? We shall see. And then trends like bidding not being particularly deep, reserves generally being lower, as shown in the Basquiat triptych, it being harder for auction houses to consign grade A works. These trends have been going on for a while. I'm not sure if this can be described as a trend, but the kind of determination and kind of doggedness demonstrated by Sotheby's in the immediate aftermath of the evening sale, it'll be interesting to see how long they can hold that up for if the results don't change. That's another thing to look out for.
And so now looking ahead, we have the traditional art world summer break, if you will, where there really aren't a lot of gallery openings, very few auctions. What do you think the mood is heading into this break?
I think the mood, especially from Sotheby's heading out of June, will be one of relief. They want to prove that they've made the right decision by sticking with the June evening auction. They still made 100 million. Which is pretty impressive given the state of the market, like I said before. Likewise, I think Christie's want to prove that they made the right move by binning their June evening sale, and I think it's probably more justified on their part. They might, there's perhaps a little bit of smugness coming out of King Street, especially in view of Sotheby's unspectacular results. The rhetoric from Christie's is that their gamble is paid off. So they're pretty chuffed, I'd say, right now. And regarding the moods going forward, people are now looking ahead to Christie's first contemporary sale in Hong Kong in September. The big three houses, they're all leaning towards Asia. So we'll see if Hong Kong can inject some nitro into the bidding and outdo New York at least. It's all very exciting, I think. Sotheby's recent contemporary sales in April in Hong Kong were pretty good. So several key lots sold within their expectations. And I think people will certainly be more optimistic about Asia this year than they have been about London.
George, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and helping us recap the major June London auctions, which are the last major auctions before the art market summer break. If our listeners haven't already, I definitely recommend they read your recaps of the auctions as well as all of your upcoming articles in ArtNews. Thanks so much again.
Great. Thank you for having me, Adam.
This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by Hangman Fine Art Services. As an art advisor, my role goes beyond helping clients acquire artworks for their collections. It's also about ensuring those artworks make it safely from the gallery to their homes. Art shipping can be a nerve-wracking process. Things can go wrong, and it's crucial to prevent these issues from occurring. Also, over the years, I found that shipping quotes can vary significantly. One shipper might quote thousands more than another for the exact same service. A few years ago, I discovered Hangman. Whenever I requested shipping quotes from various fine art shippers, Hangman almost always provided the most competitive prices. But it's not just about the cost. Hangman offers reliable, professional service and maintains excellent communication throughout the process. They guide me on how to pack specific works and keep me updated on the shipment status until it's safely delivered to my clients. Now, Hangman is my go-to art shipper. Their combination of affordability, reliability, and excellent customer service is unmatched. If you're not already a regular customer, I genuinely recommend giving them a try. I'm thrilled to have Hangman as a sponsor of the ArtTactic Podcast. To learn more about Hangman, visit www.hangmannyc.com. And you can also find them on Instagram at Hangman Fine Arts.